This is chapter 1 of Savvy. When my brother Fish turned 13, we moved to the deepest part of inland because of the hurricane and, of course, the fact that he'd caused it. If I had liked living down south on the edge of land next to the pushing, pulling waves, I had liked it with a mighty kind of liking, so moving had been hard. Hard like the pavement the first time I fell off my pink two-wheeler and my palms burned like fire from all of the hurt just under the skin. But it was plain that Fish could live nowhere near or nearby or next to or close to or on or around any largish bodies of water. Water had a way of triggering my brother and making ordinary everyday weather take a frightening turn for the worse. Unlike any normal hurricane, Fish's birthday storm had started without warning. One minute my brother was tearing paper from presents in our backyard near the beach. The next minute, both Fish and the afternoon sky went a funny and fearsome shade of gray. My brother gripped the edge of the picnic table as the wind kicked up around him, gaining momentum and ripping the wrapping paper out of his hands, sailing it high up into the sky with all of the balloons and streamers roiling together and disintegrating like a birthday party in a blender. Groaning and cracking, trees shuddered and bent over double, uprooting and falling off easily as sticks in wet sand. Rain pelted us like gravel thrown by a playground bully as windows shattered and shingles ripped off the roof. As the storm surged and the ocean waves tossed and churned, spilling raging water and debris farther and farther up the beach, Mama and Papa grabbed hold of Fish and held on tight, while the rest of us ran for cover. Mama and Papa knew what was happening. They had been expecting something like this and knew that they had to keep my brother calm and help him ride out his storm. That hurricane had been the shortest on record, but to keep the coastal towns safe from our Fish, our family had packed up and moved deep inland, plunging into the very heart of the land and stopping as close to the center of the country as we could get. There, without big water to fuel big storms, Fish could make it blow and rain without so much heartache and ruin. Settling directly between Nebraska and Kansas in a little town all of our own just off Highway 81, we were well beyond hollering distance from the nearest neighbor, which was the best place for a family like ours. The closest town was merely a far-off blur across the highway and was not even big enough to have its own school or store or gas station or mayor. Monday through Wednesday, we called our thin stretch of land Kansaska. Thursday through Friday, we called it Nebrances. On Sunday, since it was the Lord's Day, we called it nothing at all, out of respect for His creating our world without the lines already drawn on its face like all of my grandpa's wrinkles. If it weren't for old Grandpa Boomba, Kansaska, Nebrances wouldn't have even existed for us to live there. When Grandpa wasn't a grandpa and was just instead a small fry, hobble-de-hoy boy blowing out 13 dripping candles on a lopsided cake, his savvy hit him hard and sudden, just like it did to Fish that day of the backyard birthday party and the hurricane, and the entire state of Idaho got made. At least that's what the way Grandpa Boomba always told the story. Before I turned 13, he'd say, Montana bumped dead straight into Washington, and Wyoming and Oregon shared a cozy border. The tale of Grandpa's 13th birthday had grown over the years, just like the land he could move and stretch, and Mama just shook her head and smiled every time he'd start talking tall. But in truth, that young boy who grew up and grew old like wine and dirt had been making new places whenever and wherever he pleased. That was Grandpa's savvy. My savvy hadn't come along yet, but I was only 2 days away from my very own 13th dripping candles, though my Mama's cake never lopped to the side or to the middle. Mama's cakes were perfect, just like Mama, because that was her savvy. Mama was perfect. Anything she made was perfect. Everything she did was perfect. Even when she messed up, Mama messed up perfectly. I often reckoned what it would be like for me. I pictured myself blowing out the candles on my cake and fires dying in chimneys across 4 counties. Or I imagined making my secret birthday wish, getting my cheeks full and round with air, then floating up toward the ceiling like my very own happy birthday balloon. My savvy is going to be a good one, I told my brother Rocket. I just know it. Girls don't get the powerful jujubes, said Rocket, running one hand through his dark shock of unkempt hair with a crackle of static. Girls only get quiet, polite savvy, sugar and spice, and everything humdrum. Savvies, it's boys who get the earth-shaking kinds of savvy. I had scowled at my brother and stuck out my tongue. Rocket and I both knew that were plenty of girls climbing round our family tree that had strong and sturdy savvies, like Great Aunt Jules, who could step back 20 minutes in time every time she sneezed, or our second cousin Olive, who could melt ice with a single red-hot stare. Rocket was 17 and full of junk that I wasn't allowed to say until I got much older, much, much older. But he was electric, though, and through, and that had always gone to his head. For fun, Rocket would make my hair stand on end like he'd rubbed it with a balloon, or hit fish with a wicked zap from the other side of the room. But Rocket could keep the lights on when the power went out, and our family sure liked that, especially the littler Beaumonts. Rocket was the oldest, with Fish and me following after. Born only a year apart, Fish and I were nearly the same height and looked a lot alike, both with hair like sand and straw, hair like Mama's. But while I had Papa's hazel eyes, Fish had Mama's ocean blue ones. It was as if we'd each taken a little bit of Mama or a little bit of Papa and made the rest our own. I wasn't the youngest or the smallest in the family. Brody Sampson was a dark and shadowy 7, and doll-faced Gypsy was 3. It was Gypsy who started calling me Mibs when my full name, Mississippi, became far too much for her toothsome toddler tongue to manage. But that had been a relief. That name had always followed me around like one of Fish's heavy storm clouds. The itch and scritch of birthday buzz was about all I was feeling on the Thursday before the Friday before the Saturday I turned 13. Sitting at the dinner table next to Papa's empty chair and ready plate, I barely ate a bite. Across from me, Gypsy prattled endlessly, counting the make-believe creatures she imagined seeing in the room and begging me to help her name them. I pushed the food around my plate, ignoring my sister and daydreaming about what it would be like when I got my very own savvy, when the telephone rang right in the middle of pot roast, mashed potatoes, and mighty unpopular green beans. And Mama rose to answer. Us kids, and Grandpa Boomba too, seized the chance to plop our mashers on top of our beans while Mama's back was turned. Samson tucked some of those beans into his pockets to give to his dead pet turtle, even though Mama always said he shouldn't be giving it any of our good food, seeing how it was dead and all, and the food would just go to rot. But Samson was sure, as sadly sure, that his turtle was only hibernating, and Mama hadn't the heart to toss it from the house. We were all smiling to each other around the kitchen table at the smart way we'd taken care of those beans when Mama dropped the phone with a rattling clatter and a single sob, perfectly devastated. She sank to the floor looking for all the world as if she were staring right through the checkered brown and blue